Well, folks, as you can see, I have my friend Steve Hart with me again. And this is the video for June the 10th, 2020, video number 3481. And the title is, Will Racism Ever End? Steve, go ahead. We've already pre-talked, but go ahead what you said.
Well, first, let me preface this by saying that not everybody's going to agree with me on this, and not everybody's going to understand what I'm going to say at the end of this conversation. And I know that, and I have, on the topic of racism, people will say, well, it will never end, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit. I have had this conversation with numerous people in the last week or so. Not like I've never had it before, because I have throughout my life. But the thing is, I think we're at a point now in our evolution of consciousness where we're really beginning to move beyond this. But that's why we're having this discussion today with the video here. So I want to bring up the story that you shared a week ago when you were downtown and you ran into some protesters. So tell the story how it happened.
Yeah, I was coming home from my walk to the river and going through downtown Melbourne, and there were, I don't know, 20, there might have been 25 people, black and white, and there were two children I remember in the lineup. And they were all chanting, "Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter." And I went through saying, "All lives matter, all lives matter."
So you yelled at?
No, I'm not yelling.
You're just walking through and saying that.
I'm just walking through saying that.
Yeah.
And now we've passed each other. One of the ladies, the black lady, turned around and got in my face and started screaming at me. All lives matter only when black lives matter. In other words, she was playing the role, as has been given by our media, of being the victim of things that she personally never had to go through. You know, she was never a slave, I'm pretty sure. I don't know her life story or anything. But in any case, I thought she was going to literally hit me, and another black lady came, grabbed her around the waist, and pulled her back from me. Because, I mean, she was very irate at me for saying that all lives matter. This is the insanity that's going on right now on this.
Yeah, it is. What did you say to her, or what did you do? Just were you?
Well, when the other lady pulled her off, I was saying all lives matter. I'm not saying black lives don't matter. And that's never been my point. I support an orphanage in Uganda, and I've been doing it for over a year, sending them money.
Yeah.
And I, of course, I've made videos with them, and they've shown the kids. There's 34 orphans, black orphans. I am not against black people at all, or any other race.
But they didn't know that when they were protesting and confronting you, when you said all lives matter.
There's never been a dialogue, and that's part of the problem. People that have their minds already made up are unwilling to dialogue with people that have a different vantage point or point of view. And how can you resolve issues when there cannot be equal and opposite conversation to put the ideas back without arguing? That's the key point. As soon as it gets into you're wrong, there's no more conversation.
And that's been the challenge for hundreds of years, you know, I mean.
Millennia, probably.
Yeah, right. So what I want to try to do here today is to introduce a solution. And at the same time, we need to identify what's really happening here. Because you pointed out that they think they're right and they want to be right. You want to open up and try to say all lives matter, but they come back with, because they see that as a threat. And it's not just your story, but around the globe, what I'm hearing through the media, and even my brother the other day made that comment, and somebody retorted back to him with the same negative energy. What do you mean all lives matter? You know, because they or whoever hears that says, well, you're not recognizing the fact that we matter, that Black Lives Matter. So there's a push and pull that's going on here, and that's a battle that we have, and I think we will always have, as long as we hold that level of consciousness, that level of awareness. So when I've been asking myself, what's the answer to this? And the answer I got was to go within myself and ask, where does that come from? Where is it? What part of me is it that experiences any degree of racism? Now, in my case, I'm 6'5". I'm a real tall guy.
You were 6'7".
I was 6'7". That's right. Now that I'm turning 67 this next month, I'm shrinking a little bit. You know. So the point I'm making is that I've always been tall, and I've always stood out in a crowd, and so the contrast has made me a target for people to ridicule me or to separate themselves from me. Not everybody sees a tall person as being a positive thing. They see it as a threat. The point I'm making is I can identify a little bit, with the concept of being black. And I have black friends, and you have black friends,
Yes,
and I love my brothers and sisters who are of all color. The point is there's still this contrast, there's still this separation, and where does it come from? And I have to confess, within me, as I believe is with everyone, it's because of my ego. My ego says that I'm special. My ego says I need to separate myself from people because I need to take care of myself. And that's what the ego is designed to do. The ego is designed to protect us. And so what happens is, anytime I feel threatened, my ego flares up and wants to protect itself. And then it wants to control, it wants to gather, it only knows itself. It doesn't even really care about the truth. It really only wants to know itself, and take care of itself. It becomes blinded to the truth of what's really going on. So the point I'm making is, what we're really dealing with is every person's ego is what we're dealing with here. And that's where the conflict, even, I want to be right. That's what the ego says. I want to be right. And everybody has that sense of feeling. Now, here's the question is that the only part of me that's me? Is it just me, just my ego? Or is there another part of my being that is not the ego? How would you answer that, Ron?
The ego, I define ego as simply the present point of view. And remember, in a lot of spiritual teaching, there is no past, there is no future. There's only now. Now is what we have to deal with. So the ego point of view of this is where I am, these are my perceptions based on my experience and my training, unfortunately, in many cases. I mean, as I've said, I read the Bible through every year for about 25 years. And I missed the contradictions. How? Because I was taught that there were no contradictions. And this is how humanity becomes brainwashed. Is that an ego problem, or is that a problem that's higher than the ego by whoever the controllers are that run the system, if you will? So that's what I have a problem with.
You're bringing out a good question, or pointing out a problem, and that is the way I perceive what you just said is that we do not know what the ego really is. Now, you defined it as your awareness, your current level of awareness, your consciousness, right?
Well, some people say ego means edging God out. I have
No,
never edged God out.
okay, I'm not going to make that point as much as I said the ego only cares about itself, and that's true. It's designed to protect us. We are given an ego when we come into this world, and it's designed to protect us. But there comes a moment in our life when we begin to realize that we're more than just our ego. The soul is that seat of awareness that we have that I think you're describing, and the ego. Let's put it this way: we can define the ego by, as I just did a while ago, or we can define the counterparts of us that we become aware of, like patience, kindness, gentleness. That is not part of the ego. The ego does not do that. The only reason the ego would be kind to someone if it's going to gain something and get something out of it.
Manipulation.
Yeah, the manipulation. Yeah, that's what the ego does. And I'm not here to condemn the ego as much as I am to recognize what it is. And once we begin to realize that race system's seat comes from the ego, it has to do with trying to separate, and that's where we get the supremacy, or we feel superior over someone because it wants to protect itself. And when you and I have let go of that racism, that is the work of something else within us that's not part of the ego. So what is that part? It's our spirit being. We're waking up to our spirit being. It's the part of us that is not part of this physical body, not part of the ego. It's really not even my mind. It's seated within my heart. And in harmony with my mind, the spirit begins to reveal itself to me. Because I am a spirit being, and I was a spirit being before I came into this physical form. And that's what I'm identifying with. That when you show your kindness and your love and patience and gentleness with people, that is your spirit that's doing that. It's not your ego. So when we can start defining the difference between our ego and our spirit, or your heart, or whatever word you want to use, then you begin to see that there's a difference. So maybe this is why Christianity and Buddhism seeks to separate itself, seeks to help us separate ourselves from our ego. In Buddhism, it's called no self awareness, right. And in Christianity, it's called dying to the old man. The pick up your cross and follow me was what Jesus said. Denying yourself, and the born again,
self-denial,
and the born again experience, being born again. So the Spirit of God is already within us, or we wouldn't be alive. But there has to be an awakening to understand the difference between the Spirit of God and our ego.
Well,
and that's what's happened.
As you know, and I'm sure we've had many conversations, I've had spiritual experiences that were ecstatic. I mean, I really felt like I was communicating with God.
You were.
And it felt that way, and that's how I would have defined it in the moment, in the time that it was happening. Now, retrospectively, I look back and I thought, what was I deceiving myself? And this is one of the questions that I asked me. I was taught certain things and I believed they were true, and I had certain experiences, but yet things did not happen to progressing in humanity that I thought I was here to play a role in helping to progress towards, if that makes sense.
It does. And like, as I said, the only way to do that is to identify what is spirit and what is ego. And we have problems in our mind separating those two and understanding. So when you go and you look at the scriptures, it refers to the fruits of the Spirit. And
starting with love.
Yes, right. It starts with love, but it also goes on and defines, as I was referring to a while ago, gentleness, kindness, patience, self-control.
Long suffering.
long suffering.
That's
All
what we've
these
been.
things.
That's what we've been involved in for a long time. We've been suffering a long
That is
time.
right. So if we can start focusing on the fruits of the Spirit and realizing that that is us, that is our true nature, our spirit nature, and not our ego. And then understand what the ego is going to do. The ego is going to separate itself. The ego is going to defend itself. So you see the difference?
Yeah, I don't try to separate. I try to bring everything together.
Well, no, yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I'm not trying. I'm just trying to. I'm not trying to separate it myself either. All I'm trying to do is I tell my ego, hey, take a back seat,
Yeah,
because
I
I
am
know
this, but
what
I'm
you're
that
saying.
too. I am
Yes,
this
that's right.
and that too.
Right. Yeah.
Both
As long
and.
as I'm in this physical form, I will always have my ego be present. Yeah, there's no question about that. But I don't let it control me. It's not my master. Whereas, and the seat of racism is based in the ego. You know, it tries to wants to control us and control our environment, control other people, and because of that, there's that friction. That's where we have the conflict. So, am I making any sense on this?
I think you're doing the best you can, and I think most of us are doing the best we can as well.
Yes, that's exactly right.
You
This is
know,
the first.
we're trying to make sense out of what seems like nonsense,
You're right, and
that's a big challenge.
right. This is the first
Hey.
time. This is the first time I've actually had a discussion like this about this topic, about racism. See, my belief is, as long as we live within our egos and let our egos control us, there will always be racism. And the truth is, no lives matter. If in the ego, it's only, or rather, it's both. Either all lives matter and no lives matter. The truth is, it's our spiritual awareness, though, that we live through spirit, not through our ego, that really matters. Now, out of that, I have all respect and love and patience and acceptance of every man, when I let spirit rule my heart.
Yeah, and yet in confrontations such as the one that I described earlier, that you had me regurgitate back to you, I mean, I don't feel animosity toward that woman, but I would like to sit down and have a reasonable conversation. That will likely never happen. And I have to accept the fact that I cannot force that to happen any more than I can force any of the people in the spiritual circles that I've been traveling in to sit
But
down.
I also feel that our having a discussion here and you're telling the story is coming into the awareness of the collective, of all of us. So it is making a difference. So you had that experience for a reason, and I appreciate that, and you're sharing it, and the fact that we get to actually evolve and become more aware of ourselves by you telling your story. And that's what I'm trying to do here, because I haven't got this all figured out myself, except to tell you that
I don't know that anybody does. Don't feel bad.
Yeah. But the difference is when I can learn to, as I just said a while ago, to not let my ego control me and become aware of when it is trying to control me, and tell it to take the back seat and tune into my spirit. The problem is we don't know the difference within ourselves, because we have, the ego and the spirit within us, and it becomes very confusing until we can identify and realize which each one is.
Yeah, that's hard, because it does require us to separate the two to make the distinctions. And yet the two cannot be separated, at least not while we're here in this level of existence.
Yeah. As you said, I'm not trying to separate my ego from my spirit, but we need to become aware of making a choice of which one I want to control me. And as long as I let my ego control me, I'm going to be wanting to separate myself from people to protect myself. So,
which is natural,
Excuse me, my allergies here are kicking up. Yeah, which is natural. You're right.
The natural man. But you see,
Right.
I don't believe that God created. I believe that natural man was manipulated by another level of creation that resisted the creator.
Well,
And
let's
I know
that's
that's
a
a
whole nother
big,
discussion.
yes, it's a big topic, but that's one
Yeah,
of the things that weighs
I'm
on me.
aware of where you're going with that. Yeah, yeah. But being that we're here in this world, in this reality, or this illusion, how you want to refer to it, we have to adapt to that. We have to say, okay, so there is a difference between my ego and my spirit. And even though I have this ego, you know, how do I want to interact with that? You know.
Yeah, how can I bring harmony
Yes.
instead of cacophony?
The biggest challenge to me, and I distinctly remember when I realized that I am not my ego, I am not my mind. You know, that was the biggest challenge for me. Now I have a daily experience of making that choice as I live life, and as thoughts could, because I find myself at times. Someone said the other day, you know, are you racist? I said, no, I'm not racist, and yet every once in a while, little things will pop up that I will say to myself, maybe I am being a little racist, you know. And I go, no, well, I'm going to change my mind about that. I'm going to change my perspective, and I make that choice. But the fact that I become aware of it is the process that we're going through in the evolution of our consciousness. So I choose not to be racist. I choose not to be. I choose not to separate myself from anybody or anything.
Me too, as you
Yeah,
well know.
well, but that's not easy to do. And as your listeners here, it may be difficult for some of them to even to admit to that.
Yeah.
But I can identify with that because I'm experiencing something different from my ego. And it is the power of love, of joy and peace in the divine spirit within me. That's what I'm experiencing. And not everybody's having that experience. So it is going to be difficult. But until we tap into that, until we recognize that, it's going to be there's going to be a lot of conflict. But I think that's where we're going. I really do. I think that's what's happening. All this chaos and confusion that's going on, and all the distorted parts of truth, it's happening because there has to be a collapse for something new to open up, and that's what's happening. There's the seed of this awareness I'm referring to is within every person. And I'll be honest, I will say, in contrary to the Christian teaching, I believe the Holy Spirit of God is already within you. You don't need to ask for it to come in. You just need it for it to waken
Well, if
up.
it's omnipresent, it's everywhere present in the
That's true.
believers and the unbelievers.
That's true. But you and I were both taught through our Christianity that we had to receive the Holy Spirit. It's already there. It's not awake. We've not tapped into it, you know.
So it probably is awake. There's a part of us that hasn't awakened to it.
Well, someone asked me the other day, they said, well, are you awake? And I said, I'm awakening. I won't say I'm awake, because if I was totally awakened, I'd be far more involved in my consciousness than I am now.
And would you still be in three dimensions? See, some people say that when we fully wake up, we won't need the three dimensions to teach us anymore. We'll have
And
transcended. We'll have transcended to a different reality. The
I think that's true.
the fifth dimensional reality that's supposed to be impinging on the third and fourth one right now.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
I used to think I knew what truth was. Now perhaps it's a falling away, as some say it is, that you've backslidden, Ron. But I see it as a greater awakening, because I'm admitting to the possibilities that not everything I've ever thought was true is true.
And you're finding a peace in that. You're learning how to not judge yourself so harshly as you had in your previous life. You've learned to embrace, you know, your being, your awareness, be it both the ego and the spirit. You know, because Christianity wants to create a conflict, of the good and evil type conflict, of well, the ego is bad and the spirit is good, and whatever the conflict is. But that is part of the illusion that we buy into, that the ego wants to create this conflict because it enjoys the drama. That's what sells on TV.
Yes, that is true. And when I watch the Forensic Files, which is actually one of my favorite programs, where they're solving mysteries that were unsolved for like 20 years in some cases, and they're finding out through forensic science, they're finding out DNA evidence and other things that was overlooked previously. So I find that fascinating, because to me that is a piece of the awakening. It's not necessarily the spiritual piece, but then everything to me is the spiritual.
That's what I was getting ready to say. Yeah, it's still part of it. Everything is evolving. The light is coming in, and everything is being exposed for what it is. So be it.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's something to think about. At least that's, and I'm sure we'll continue our discussions about this in the future. But I just encourage people to go within and to connect to the divine spirit within them, and then when the ego shows up, just recognize what it is. If it's anything contrary to these fruits of the spirit I referred to, then it's not spirit. It's the ego, and not to condemn the ego, but rather put it in its place, to master it.
Bring balance and harmony.
Yes. Otherwise, you're right. We would go crazy with this. That's where
Uh-oh.
you see the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other one. That's the whole concept,
Yeah, you froze for a bit there.
Oh, I did? I was talking about the devil.
No, I mean, I got that, but the video froze up for just a brief moment.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm going to be seeing you in a few days. You're going to be coming back to Florida with Aileen.
Yes, I'm coming down. Yeah, Aileen and I both are flying down.
I know. I'm picking you up.
Yes, you're picking us up at the airport. Yay.
So thank you again for being my friend and allowing me to be me and to express the challenges that I'm facing. And
as we all are.
We need to do this to help each other.
Yeah,
right. And as much as we can, stop the judgment and the condemnation.
Yeah. As Ram Dass said, we're all walking each other home.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Bliss.
Namaste.
Bye-bye.